Okay, so what can audiences expect when you host the screening of Clue on November 16th at the Studebaker Theater?
Well, they can expect some backstage stories, what happened behind the scenes of the movie and the making of the movie and the personalities involved. And then I do an interview on stage, sort of answering those kinds of questions.
Hmm.
And then I take questions from the audience, which is really the fun part because they ask very specific questions about what happened.
So, in the period in which you made the film Clue, what was happening in your career that led to the hot streak that had you doing Victor Victoria, Night in Heaven, Choose Me, etc.?
You know, it's I there are no answers for that because if there were, we'd all figure it out and be working all the time.
True.
But it's I think it was a combination of things. I was at a certain age in my life. I had a phenomenal agent who was
Great.
head of CAA and the president of CAA, and then went on to
Nice.
become president of Universal, Ron Meyer, and it was just a combination of great opportunities, really.
Excellent. So, the cast, of course, was a dream team with even a member of the Go Go's thrown in at the height of their fame. Who, who in the cast were you most excited to work with, and which impressed you the most once you started working on the film?
Well, honestly, I was excited to work with all of them because
Hmm.
I really do believe that they were and were, I suppose,
Oh,
some of the great comic actors of the time.
yeah.
They weren't comedians; they were actual comic actors, and they were all very unique and brought a very specific sort of quality and understanding of the character. The closest person I got to was Martin Mull because
Ah.
we were Colonel Mustard because we were partnered up in the movie, and I adored him. And then we went on to make 4 or 5 films and television projects together. We stayed really close, dear friends.
Excellent, excellent. So, why do you think the film still resonates after 40 years? What do you think is the key to its cult status?
It's really funny.
There you
I
go.
mean, I was at a personal appearance a while back, and they were setting up, and they showed them, they were putting the movie, make sure the sound was okay, and all of that. And I had to stop and watch like 7 minutes of it. I was supposed to be doing my makeup, but it's so funny, and I think it really truly does hold up. The comedy holds up.
Right.
Um, but I also, again, I think that each person was so specific in their own particular comic sensibility and how they created and developed their characters. And it was one of those blessed lightning in a bottle moments where
Yeah.
everyone truly blended and got along so well and
Excellent.
created this wonderful movie.
Yeah. Can I ask you some career questions?
Sure.
All right. What was the circumstances of you landing your first Broadway role in 110 to Shade at a very young age in 1963? And what was the atmosphere of Broadway at the time that made it magical for an actor starting out as yourself?
Well, it was my dream to do Broadway because I grew up in Manhattan and I trained
Nice.
for, the stage from the time well, it started to be a ballerina when I was 6, and I continued that until I was about 14. And then I veered off into musical theater because my girlfriend was in Bye Bye Birdie and she was
Wow.
maybe a year or two older than me. And I used to stand in the wings and watch her and think,
Man.
I can do this.
Yeah.
So I started auditioning when I was about 16 years old, and I auditioned for My Fair Lady and chorus, and I auditioned for these
Mhm.
different things. And then I did audition for Bye Bye Birdie, the national company, when I was 14, and I did get it. But my parents didn't want me to, they wanted me to finish high school. So at the end of my high school, because I skipped a year, I was turning 17 in the summer. So I was 16 and a half, and I started auditioning for 110. And I auditioned over a period of 6 months. And ultimately, I got it
Yeah.
and went into rehearsal when I was turning 17.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Of course, in those days, you ran in extra cities before you came back to Manhattan, right? So
Not
you,
not that long. I mean, we
okay,
did some previews in Boston and Philadelphia. Yeah, but really that was, that was it. And then we came in and did some more rehearsal in New York, and then we opened. Yeah.
excellent. So what was the evolution into the Roger Corman AIP film Pickup on the 101? Intentional for you to transition into adult roles in your 20s as the 60s gave into the 70s? And what did you learn on that shoot about yourself or filmmaking in general while in production?
I think I was 22 when I did that.
Wow.
I think, and I I do remember that I was hoping, because I had already done Cinderella,
All
and
right.
and I wanted to branch out and do other kinds of roles, and this was definitely different than Cinderella. But I also was really excited to work with Martin Sheen and Jack Albertson,
Yeah,
and
wow.
that was thrilling for me to be on my first real movie set with Martin Sheen, and he was, very young as well.
Yeah,
Um, and what I learned, I guess, was how much I loved it. I didn't know I would love it
it's
because
so
I
great.
hadn't done it. Mhm.
Of course, your unforgettable performance in Victor Victoria is the stuff of legend. What kind of director was Blake Edwards in the sense of how he allowed you to stretch the comic potential of Norma? And what touches did you give her to add to the magic that got you the Oscar nomination?
Well, Norma, the character, was not blonde, and she did not have an accent, and there was no musical number.
Wow.
So with my acting coach at the time, we created this character from our imagination. My acting coach's name was Norena, and we made up a whole history for her. That she lived on the Lower East Side, and that she had to yell to get heard, and that she, had the accent of the Lower East Side. And then I said, well, she's got to be blonde. I mean, this is. So I called Blake Edwards in London. He was already in London, and he was not available. And his producer got on the phone, Tony Adams, and I said, well, look, I have these ideas and I don't know. And he said, let me run it by Blake. Blake loved it, and he
Ah,
sent his wig maker and his costume designer to my home, and we sat in my bedroom and made up this character.
oh, that's great.
So when I flew to London to have to with everybody to start the movie, but we had these major sort of screen tests to see how it, whatever we wanted to do. I was afraid. I thought, because he met me like this. And I was afraid that when he saw me like her, he would be like, I've changed my mind. But he loved it.
I just talked to Alan Rudolph last year, and interestingly, he thinks he's pretty much forgotten, which to me is
Oh,
impossible. What kind of challenge was Choose Me for you, and what do you remember about Alan?
I think the biggest challenge was that my agents didn't want me to do it because I fell
Ah,
in love with them.
interesting.
I met Alan and the producer Carolyn Pfeiffer at the Beverly Wilshire bar, and we had drinks and talked, and I fell in love with Alan. So it was a hard shoot. We were
Hmm.
the three of us, Genevieve Bugeaud and Keith Carradine and myself,
Yeah.
shared a trailer with
Wow.
wardrobe and makeup. I mean, it was a very low budget independent film, and but it was magical. It was
Yeah, it
really
really was.
magical. I remember, I'll just say really quickly, it was 2 in the morning and I was changing for some other scene, and Alan always had this music playing on the set, Teddy Pendergrass. And he had these big, huge, we were outside and he had big speakers. And I went up to him and I said, I dance to that. And he said, you do? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, okay, start over there and end up there. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, do it. And that became the opening shot of the movie, which I
It's
just love.
legendary. Legendary. Just a couple more. Of the various films you've done since the 1990s, which one do you want your admirers to particularly focus on as one you think is both different for you as a performer and notable in its final result?
I'm going to veer off that question by telling you that I've just done a short film
Nice.
called Olive that is getting spectacular reviews. I
Excellent.
can honestly say that. and the kind of reviews actors dream about. And it is entirely different than anything I've ever done.
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
I look entirely different, and it is beautiful, and it's haunting. And so that would be something I would hope people would see, because when they do, they're deeply moved by it.
If you were able to go back in time and talk to that girl making her Broadway debut, what advice would you give her? And would that advice affect the timeline of your actual fantastic career?
I'm reading this book by Keith McNally. It's called I Regret Almost Everything. But I think I would tell her that I wish that she wouldn't feel so afraid and so insecure, because everything's going to work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it took me a long, long, long time to develop an inner spiritual strength in life, so that I could withstand the enormous amount of rejection that everybody gets in this business.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2025.